Chapter 5. The Franklin Family. Sometime after the word reached Philadelphia that Deborah Reed's first husband had died in the West Indies, Ben Franklin renewed the romance which had been interrupted by his voyage to England. I pitied poor Miss Reed's unfortunate situation, who was generally dejected, seldom cheerful, and avoided company. I considered my giddiness and inconsistency when in London as in a great degree the cause of her unhappiness, though the mother was good enough to think the fault more her own than mine, as she had prevented our marrying before I went thither, and persuaded the other match in my absence. Our mutual affection was revived, but there were now great objections to our union. That match, the marriage of Deborah and John Roberts, was indeed looked upon as invalid, a preceding wife being said to be living in England, but this could not easily be proved because of the distance, and though there was a report of his death, it was not certain. Then, though it should be true, he had left many debts which his successor might be called on to pay. We ventured, however, over all these difficulties, and I took her to wife September 1st, 1730. None of the inconveniences happened that we had apprehended. She proved a good and faithful helpmate, assisted me much by attending the shop. We throve together, and have ever mutually endeavored to make each other happy. Thus I corrected that great erratum as well as I could. Franklin's writings show that he was much more content with life after his marriage to Deborah. Thereafter, he frequently spoke of the married state as the happiest of all possible conditions. This passage, written to a friend in 1745, is typical of his expressions on the subject. Marriage is the most natural state of man, and therefore the state in which you are most likely to find solid happiness. It is the man and woman united that make the complete human being. Separate, she wants his force of body and strength of reason, he her softness, sensibility, and acute discernment. Together they are more likely to succeed in the world. A single man has not nearly the value he would have in the state of union. He is an incomplete animal. He resembles the odd half of a pair of scissors. The first child to enter the Franklin family was William, apparently born in the spring of 1731. He is commonly said to have been illegitimate, at least most historians think so, although the only evidence that has been cited is that everybody knew it. The identity of William's mother has long been debated by the scholars. Many believe that Deborah conceived the child before she assumed the name of Mrs. Franklin, but that Benjamin took all the blame himself in order to save Deborah's honor. In any event, William was welcomed into the Franklin household and was reared and educated as a legitimate son. He later became the governor of New Jersey. Another son, Francis Folger Franklin, was born in October 1732. His father considered him the delight of all that knew him, and both he and Deborah were crushed by grief when Frankie died of smallpox at the age of 4. Franklin, who had seen 10% of the population of Boston killed by a smallpox epidemic in the summer of 1721, regretted bitterly that he had not inoculated his little boy before it was too late. 36 years later, he still had very tender feelings about my son Frankie, whom to this day I cannot think of without a sigh. Their third and last child, Sarah, Sally, was born in September 1743, making her 12 years younger than her brother William. She eventually gave her father 7 grandchildren, and she finally became a nurse to him in his last days. Perhaps a word should be said here about the spurious accounts of additional Franklin children, as such claims have become increasingly popular in recent years. Today, noted a 1975 magazine article, Franklin folklore overflows with tales of womanizing, including a fictitious family of 13 illegitimate children. Such stories have lately crept even into school textbooks. Claude Ann Lopez, a Franklin scholar at Yale University, has corrected these myths and provided some insight regarding their origins. Apart from the existence of William, who was treated as a legitimate son, there is hardly any explicit evidence to convict Franklin either of promiscuity or its opposite, but the rumors sprang up in his own lifetime and have gained ground ever since. The story of his illegitimate daughter is a case in point. In 1770, Franklin's close associate, John Foxcroft, married Judith Osgood in England. Franklin gave away the bride and referred to her thereafter as his daughter because he had acted as surrogate father at the wedding. By no means an unusual practice. Many were the women he would call wife or daughter throughout his life, in a teasing or affectionate manner, without suspecting, of course, that anybody would take him literally, then or later. In addition to the immediate family, Deborah's widowed mother and an occasional apprentice or journeyman also lived with the Franklins, all on the second floor of the house, as the printing shop and the small general store occupied the ground level. Besides the salves and ointments concocted by Ben's mother-in-law, advertised as sufficient to remove the most inveterate itch, the store offered a wide variety of foods and household items: coffee, tea, fish, cheeses, spices, quill pens, lead pencils, ink, stationery, maps, books, legal forms, broadcloth, stockings, lumber, stoves, sealing wax, spectacles, compasses, scales, and even a horse and carriage now and then. Deborah was invaluable to her husband in maintaining a successful business. Over 50 years after their marriage, he would write to an acquaintance, "Frugality is an enriching virtue, a virtue I never could acquire in myself, but I was once lucky enough to find it in a wife, who thereby became a fortune to me." He also appreciated her industry. She not only reared their children and ran the household, but also managed the store, kept the books, and later handled the postal accounts when Franklin was appointed postmaster. She assisted me cheerfully in my business, folding and stitching pamphlets, tending shop, purchasing old linen rags for the paper makers, etc., etc. We kept no idle servants. Our table was plain and simple, our furniture of the cheapest, but Deborah did not let frugality prevent an occasional treat for her husband. My breakfast was a long time bread and milk, no tea, and I ate it out of a two-penny earthen porringer with a pewter spoon. But mark how luxury will enter families and make a progress in spite of principle. Being called one morning to breakfast, I found it in a china bowl with a spoon of silver. They had been bought for me without my knowledge by my wife, and had cost her the enormous sum of 3.20, for which she had no other excuse or apology to make but that she thought her husband deserved a silver spoon and china bowl as well as any of his neighbors. And that is the end of that chapter.